I never thought I would see my own photograph nailed to the door of a church with the words, "Presence not permitted at my son's wedding." Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is Michael Mike Miller. I am 65 years old, and for decades, I built a small family empire based on honest work and sacrifice. Properties in Austin, a construction company I inherited from my father. And I always put my family above everything, especially Adrian, my only son, the heir to everything I had built with these callous hands. September 14th, 2024, should have been the happiest day of my life. My son was marrying Beatrice, a woman he had met 8 months ago who supposedly worked as a financial consultant. From the beginning, I was worried about her, but Adrian seemed in love, and I just wanted to see my son happy. That morning, I got up early as always. I put on my best suit, the navy blue one I had bought especially for the occasion. I shaved carefully, combed what was left of my hair, and even put on a tie that Adrian had given me last year for my birthday. I was nervous, but it was a happy nervousness. I was going to give my son away at his wedding. I arrived at St. Raphael's Church in downtown Austin at 5:30 in the afternoon. The guests were already arriving. Some greeted me cordially, others seemed to avoid my gaze. I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was more sensitive than normal because of the emotion of the moment. But when I approached the main entrance of the church, my world collapsed. There, stuck with duct tape on the carved wooden door, was a photograph of me, a photo they had taken from my Facebook profile, printed on letter-sized paper, and below, in red letters that seemed to scream, the words that pierced my soul like daggers, "Presence not permitted." I was paralyzed. The guests passed by my side, some whispering, others simply averting their gaze in embarrassment. I felt as if the ground was opening under my feet. My own photograph, prohibiting me from entering my son's wedding. An elderly woman I did not know approached and gently touched my shoulder. "Sir, are you okay? You're very pale." I could not answer. I could only point to the photograph with my trembling hand. She looked at it and whispered, "Oh my God, how awful." It was then that I saw Adrian leave through a side door of the church. Our eyes met for a second. I hoped to see surprise, indignation, for him to run towards me to explain that this was a terrible mistake. But instead, I saw something that destroyed me. I saw guilt and a diverted gaze. My own son knew about this. At that moment, I understood that it was not a mistake. It was not a bad joke. It was not a confusion. It was a deliberate decision. Adrian and Beatrice had decided that I did not have a place on their special day. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked towards my car. Each step felt as heavy as if I were carrying stones in my shoes. I heard murmurs behind me, but I did not care. I just wanted to get away from there, from that public humiliation, from the most painful betrayal I had experienced in my 65 years of life. I got home and sat in my usual chair, the brown one in front of the television, but I did not turn it on. I just stayed there, looking at the wall, trying to process what had happened. How did this happen? What had I done wrong? For the next 3 hours, my phone did not stop ringing. Call after call. At first, I thought it would be Adrian apologizing, explaining that everything had been a misunderstanding. But I did not answer any of them. I did not have the strength to talk to anyone. When I finally looked at the phone, I had 47 missed calls, 47 from numbers I recognized. Uncles, cousins, family friends, co-workers. Everyone had been at that wedding. Everyone had seen my picture at the door. Everyone knew about my humiliation. It was then that I understood that this was just the beginning of something much bigger and more sinister than I could have imagined. That night, I could not sleep. I stayed awake until 4 in the morning, reviewing every conversation, every gesture, every strange moment of the last 8 months, since Beatrice appeared in our lives. I remembered the first time Adrian introduced me to her. It was in January 2024, at my house. An elegant, well-dressed woman with a sophisticated vocabulary and a smile that now, in retrospect, seemed too calculated. She introduced herself as a financial consultant, specializing in family investments. "Your son has told me a lot about you, Mr. Miller," she had told me that afternoon, "especially about your business success. I would love to know more about your properties and business." Shay, at that moment I thought it was the natural curiosity of a future wife. Now I realized that it had been a disguised interrogation. During the following months, Beatrice's visits became more frequent. She always asked apparently innocent questions. How many properties did I have? Did I have debts? How were my bank accounts organized? I, like a trusting fool, answered proudly about what I had built for decades. "Dad has 3 condos in downtown Austin," said Adrian with admiration, "and the ranch on the outskirts is worth a fortune." Beatrice feigned interest, taking mental notes that I now understood were not for filial love, but for something much darker. The first real alarm bell came in July. I was organizing my documents when I noticed that a complete folder was missing, the one that contained the deeds to the property on Gondomar Street. I searched the whole house for hours. When I asked Adrian if he had seen it, he looked at me with a strange expression. "No, Dad, why do you need it? Those papers are safe, right?" His answer was evasive, but I decided not to give it any importance. A fatal mistake. In August, Adrian began to suggest that I needed help managing my finances. "Beatrice knows some very good people at the bank, Dad. They could help you optimize your investments." I rejected the offer courteously. I didn't need help from strangers to manage the money that I had earned with my own sweat. It was then that the secret meetings began. I heard them speaking in low voices when they thought I could not hear them. They would shut up abruptly when I entered the room. Adrian began to show irritation when I asked questions about his wedding plans or his finances. "Don't worry about that, Dad," he told me with a coldness he had never shown me before. Last week, September 7th, exactly a week before the wedding, Adrian came home with some papers. He told me that they were routine documents related to the ceremony, things I needed to sign as the groom's father. I, blindly trusting my son, signed without reading carefully. Now, sitting in my armchair at 5 a.m. on September 15th, with a broken heart and a clear mind for the first time in months, I decided to review what exactly I had signed. I got up and went to my desk. I searched through my papers until I found the copies of the documents that Adrian had given me. I spread them out on the table and lit the desk lamp. What I read left me frozen. They were not wedding documents, they were loan applications. 3 different applications, all with my name, my signature, my financial details. The largest was for $55,000, dated for yesterday, the day of the wedding. My hands trembled as I held the paper. Adrian had made me sign my own financial ruin without my knowledge. He had used my trust, my paternal love, my desire to make my son happy, to rob me. I ran to my computer and accessed my online bank account. What I saw on the screen confirmed my worst fears. The $55,000 loan had been approved and transferred yesterday at 3:47 p.m., exactly 43 minutes before I arrived at the church and found my picture forbidding me to enter. While I was preparing for my son's wedding, he was robbing me. At that moment, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, but finally answered. "Mr. Miller, this is Carol Davis from Bank of America. I'm sorry to call you so early, but we have an irregular situation with your account. Could you come to the branch office today?" My nightmare was just beginning. At 9 a.m., I was standing in front of the Bank of America branch on Congress Avenue. Carol Davis turned out to be a middle-aged woman with a serious expression who greeted me in her office with a look of genuine concern. "Mr. Miller, we have to talk about some very irregular movements in your account," she said as she opened a folder full of documents. "In the last 72 hours, multiple credit requests under your name have been made, but there are inconsistencies in the signatures and procedures." She showed me the papers. Indeed, there were 3 more requests that I had never seen. In addition to the $55,000 loan that had already been approved, there were attempts to obtain another $40,000, $30,000, and a line of credit for an additional $80,000. "The good news," Carol continued, "is that our security system automatically blocked the last 3 requests because it detected suspicious patterns. but we need to know if you really authorized these movements. I explained the whole situation to her. The manipulation, the wedding, the public humiliation. Carol listened with professional attention, taking detailed notes. Mr. Miller, this constitutes serious fraud. We need to file a formal police report immediately. We are also going to freeze all your accounts until we resolve this situation. I returned home with a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because the bank had prevented a major disaster. Terror because I had just confirmed that my own son had tried to financially ruin me. But the worst was yet to come. That afternoon, while I was obsessively reviewing all my personal documents, I found something that left me breathless. At the bottom of my desk drawer, mixed with old invoices, there was a folder that I did not remember having stored there. I opened it and found photocopies of all my most important documents: property deeds, insurance policies, my will, certificates of deposit. But they were not copies I had made. The paper was different. The quality of the print, too. Someone else had taken these copies. On the last page, I found something that chilled me to the bone: a handwritten document in Adrian's handwriting. It was a detailed list of all my assets, with estimated values and dates. At the end, a note that said, estimated total assets, $950,000. Plan B, declare mentally incompetent after exhausting current accounts. Plan B, declare mentally incompetent. My son had not only planned to steal my money, but also to take away my freedom, my autonomy, my dignity as a person. He wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent to be able to manage all my assets without legal restrictions. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together terribly. Beatrice's comments about my frequent forgetfulness when I had never had memory problems, Adrian's suggestions about seeking medical help for my stress. The interrupted conversations that I now understood were the detailed planning of my destruction. I continued to review the folder and found something even more disturbing: photographs of me, taken without my knowledge. Photos where I appeared confused, tired, or in private moments like having breakfast in my pajamas. They had been documenting any moment that could serve as evidence of my supposed mental decline. There was a particularly cruel photo: me crying the day my wife Eleanor died. Beatrice had been at home that day, supposedly consoling me. In reality, she had been photographing my pain to use it against me. At that moment, I understood that the exclusion from the wedding had been much more than a humiliation. It had been a public statement that I was no longer welcome in my own family, the first step to socially isolate me before executing their final plan. I searched the internet for information about Beatrice Sanchez. What I found confirmed that my suspicions were correct, but the reality was even worse than I had imagined. Her name appeared in several articles from newspapers in Phoenix and New Orleans. Woman convicted of marriage fraud. Fraudulent scheme aimed at older men. Victims lost life savings. Beatrice was not a financial consultant. She was a professional swindler specializing in older men with assets. Her method was always the same: seduce young men related to the victims, obtain access to financial information, isolate the victims from their social circle, and finally, strip them of all their assets. Adrian was not her accomplice. He was her tool. But there was something that the articles did not mention. Something that I had just discovered by reviewing those handwritten documents. My son had stopped being a victim to become a willing participant in the scheme. The notes in his handwriting did not show confusion or manipulation. They showed cold calculation, detailed planning, and enthusiasm for the money they were going to get by robbing me. On one of the pages, Adrian had written, "The old man is too trusting. It will be easy. Beatrice is right. It's better to act quickly before he suspects something." My son had sold me out for money. The next day, September 16th, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I hired a private investigator. I could not face the situation alone. I needed professional help to fully understand the magnitude of the deception. Jack O'Reilly had his office on the second floor of a building on Congress Avenue. A 45-year-old man, a former police officer, with that penetrating look that makes you feel he can see through lies. I explained the whole situation to him while he took notes in a worn-out notebook. "Mr. Miller," he told me after listening to my complete story, "I have seen similar cases, but never with this level of family premeditation. I need you to authorize me to investigate both Beatrice and your son. This could become very painful for you." I gave him full authorization. I had nothing left to lose. 3 days later, Jack called me into his office with results that exceeded my worst fears. He had prepared a 23-page report that meticulously documented the criminal operation. "Beatrice Sanchez," he began reading from his file. "Real name, Beatrice Herrera. Criminal records in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and New Orleans. 3 previous convictions for fraud, document forgery, and misappropriation. She specializes in what we call inheritance seduction scams." He showed me surveillance photos he had taken over the last few days. Beatrice entering and leaving an apartment in North Austin that I knew nothing about. Beatrice meeting with an older man in a cafe, reviewing documents that looked like contracts. Beatrice counting cash inside her car. "But here comes the most disturbing part," Jack continued with a serious expression. "Your son Adrian is not an innocent victim. I have evidence that he initiated contact with Beatrice." He took out his phone and played an audio recording. It was Adrian's voice speaking on the phone, but an Adrian I did not recognize. His tone was cold, calculating, completely different from the loving son I thought I knew. "I already have access to all his financial information," Adrian said in the recording. "The old man has more money than we thought. Property's worth almost $1 million, plus the bank accounts. But we have to act fast. Lately, he's asking too many questions." Beatrice's voice replied, "Perfect, dear. After the wedding, we can proceed with the final phase. Once he's socially isolated, it will be easy to justify the declaration of incompetence." "My biggest concern," continued Adrian, "is that he suspects something ahead of time. That's why I think it's better to ban him from the wedding. That way, we kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We humiliate him publicly and create evidence that he's mentally unstable because he's going to react badly." Jack paused the recording. I was trembling. Not from fear, but from a fury I had never experienced in my 65 years of life. "How did you get this recording?" I asked him. "Adrian isn't very tech-savvy," Jack explained. "He uses messaging apps that automatically save calls to the cloud. A computer technician helped me legally access them through a preliminary court order." There was more. Jack showed me bank statements he had obtained from his contacts in different financial institutions. Beatrice had accounts in 5 different banks, all with suspicious movements of large amounts of money on dates that coincided with her previous relationships. "Look at these dates," he pointed out. March 2022, a deposit of $75,000. 2 weeks after Antonio Martinez, a 71-year-old Phoenix widower, was declared mentally incompetent, August 2023, $100,000. A month after Francisco Lopez lost his house in New Orleans due to inexplicable debts. The pattern was always the same: seduction through young relatives, social isolation of the victims, document fraud, and finally, a declaration of mental incompetence to gain total control over the property. "But there's something else," Jack continued with a somber expression. "In this case, your son isn't being manipulated. He's directing the operation. Beatrice is experienced, but Adrian is the one who knows your routines, your emotional weaknesses, your important documents. He is the true architect of the plan." He showed me more evidence, text messages between Adrian and Beatrice, where my son detailed my daily routine, my sleep schedules, my visits to the doctor, even my eating habits, all to create a psychological profile that would allow them to manipulate me more effectively. In one of the most disturbing messages, Adrian wrote, "The old man is very sentimental lately, always talking about mom. We can use that. If we make him cry in public a couple of times, it will be easy to convince a judge that he's depressed and cannot make rational decisions." They had planned to use my grief over the death of Eleanor, my wife, as a weapon against me. "Mr. Miller," Jack told me, closing the file, "this is not just financial fraud. It's planned psychological torture. And the most serious thing is that your son knows exactly how much emotional damage it can cause you, because he knows better than anyone how to hurt you." I left that office a different man. The Mike Miller who had entered was a confused and betrayed father. The man who left was someone who understood that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from those we love the most. It was time to fight back. That night, I did not sleep. I stayed awake planning each move with the precision of a surgeon. If Adrian and Beatrice believed they could destroy me without consequences, they were gravely mistaken. At 6 a.m. on September 20th, I called Robert Johnson, my trusted lawyer for 15 years. Robert had managed the purchase of my properties, the will after Eleanor's death, and all the important legal matters of my life. If anyone could help me get out of this nightmare, it was him. "Mike, for God's sake, what happened?" He asked me when I arrived at his office carrying a box full of documents. "You look like you've aged 10 years in a week." I gave him everything: Jack's report, the recordings, bank documents, photographs, Adrian's handwritten notes. Robert reviewed each page with the meticulousness that characterized him, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "This is criminal, Mike," he told me after 2 hours of review. "We're not talking about a family dispute. This constitutes conspiracy to defraud, forgery of public documents, and aggravated fraud due to the family bond." He took a penal code book from his library and showed me the specific articles. "Your son could face between 5 and 10 years in prison. Beatrice, with her record, could get up to 15 years. The reality of what I was about to do hit me like a hammer. I was going to send my own son to jail. But Robert, as if reading my thoughts, put a hand on my shoulder. "Mike, you're not sending them to prison. They sent themselves there when they decided to commit these crimes. Your only responsibility is to protect yourself and ensure they don't do this to another victim." He was right, but that did not make the decision less painful. We spent the rest of the day developing a complete legal strategy. First, we would file a formal criminal complaint with the police with all the evidence collected. Second, we would request protective orders to safeguard my remaining assets. Third, we would initiate civil actions to recover the $55,000 already stolen. "But there's something else we must do," Robert added with a serious expression. "We need to protect you from any future attempt to declare you incompetent. We are going to request a complete psychological evaluation that demonstrates your full mental capacity. And we are going to change all the designations in your will and legal powers of attorney." That afternoon, while Robert was preparing the legal documents, I returned home to perform the most difficult task: to secure all the evidence before Adrian and Beatrice tried to destroy it. I checked every drawer, every file, every corner of my house. I found more disturbing things. In an envelope hidden behind some books, I found copies of keys I had never authorized. Adrian had made duplicates without my knowledge, probably to allow Beatrice to enter when I was not there. I also found a small device stuck under my desk. I did not know what it was, but I photographed it from all angles before removing it carefully. Later, Jack would confirm that it was a spy microphone. They had been recording my phone conversations for months. In my bedroom, I discovered that some of my medications had been tampered with. The pills for blood pressure that I took daily had been replaced by similar-looking but different ones. A subsequent analysis would reveal that they contained mild sedatives designed to cause drowsiness and mental confusion. They had been drugging me without my knowledge to create evidence of my supposed incompetence. The depth of their betrayal had no limits. That night, Jack came to my house with more detection equipment. We found 2 hidden cameras, one in my living room and another in my kitchen. For months, Adrian and Beatrice had been observing every moment of my private life, studying my routines, identifying vulnerabilities. "They've created a complete psychological profile," Jack explained while dismantling the cameras. "They know exactly what makes you sad, what confuses you, what situations stress you. With this information, they could have fabricated public episodes that supported their plan to declare you incompetent." While processing all this information, I received a call that made my blood boil. It was Adrian. "Dad, we need to talk," he told me in a voice that tried to sound casual, but that I now recognized as calculated. "Beatrice and I are worried about you. The wedding guests said you acted very strangely on Saturday. You acted very strangely. They had begun the final phase of their plan. They were going to use my natural reaction to their betrayal as evidence of mental instability. "Where do you want to meet, son?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. "At the house. Tomorrow morning. Beatrice wants to apologize for the misunderstanding at the wedding." Misunderstanding. That's what they called my public humiliation. "Perfect," I replied. "I'll be waiting for you." After hanging up, I immediately called Jack. "They're coming tomorrow. I need you to record the whole conversation." "It's all set," he replied. "But Mike, this is going to be very hard. They are going to try to manipulate you emotionally. They are going to make you feel guilty. They're going to use your paternal love against you. Are you sure you can handle it?" I looked at Eleanor's photo on my nightstand. My wife would have wanted me to protect everything we had built together over 35 years of marriage. I was not going to allow these criminals to destroy her legacy. "I'm ready," I said to Jack. "It's time for Adrian and Beatrice to discover who Mike Miller really is." On the morning of September 21st, I got up at 5:30, as always, but this time with a different purpose. Jack had arrived early to discreetly install recording equipment in my living room. Tiny cameras hidden among the books, directional microphones camouflaged in picture frames. If Adrian and Beatrice wanted a meeting, they would have it, but every word would be documented. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Adrian came in first, with that forced smile that I now recognized as false. Beatrice followed him, dressed elegantly, with an expression of rehearsed concern that would have deceived anyone who did not know the truth. "Dad, you look tired," Adrian told me, approaching to hug me. For the first time in my life, my son's hug made my skin crawl. "Sit down," I told them, pointing to the sofa. "Do you want coffee?" "Don't bother, Mike," Beatrice intervened with that sweet voice she had perfected for months. "We know you've been very stressed lately. Adrian told me you've had some episodes." Episodes. The key word they had chosen to describe my natural reactions to their manipulation. "What kind of episodes?" I asked, playing the role of the confused father. Adrian exchanged a significant look with Beatrice before answering. "Dad, on Saturday at the church, you acted very strangely. You left without explanation. You didn't answer our calls. The guests were worried." "I don't remember acting strange," I lied deliberately. "Could you explain to me what exactly happened?" Beatrice leaned forward with a maternal expression. "Mike, you found your photograph at the church door and reacted disproportionately. We never authorized that. It was a bad joke by some of the younger guests. A perfectly crafted lie. They had prepared this version of the facts to make me doubt my own memory. But I saw how you looked at me, Adrian," I insisted. "You seemed to know what it was about." "Dad, I think you misinterpreted my expression," my son answered with condescending patience. "I was as surprised as you. That's why Beatrice and I have decided that you need professional help." There it was. The true purpose of this visit. "What kind of help?" I asked. Beatrice took a brochure out of her bag. "We know a very good private clinic, specializing in older adults who experience confusion and memory loss. Dr. Harris is excellent." I pretended to read the brochure while processing the magnitude of their cynicism. They were so sure of their plan that they had brought propaganda from the clinic where they intended to have me committed. "Also," Adrian continued, "we thought it would be convenient for someone else to manage your finances temporarily, only until you feel better. Beatrice has a lot of experience in asset management," he added, "and as family, we know what's best for you. As family." After publicly excluding me from the wedding, they dared to talk about family. "It's an interesting proposal," I responded calmly, "but before making any decision, I would like to better understand my current financial situation. Could you help me check my bank accounts?" Another exchange of looks. They did not expect this question. "Of course, Dad," Adrian said with barely perceptible nervousness. "What do you need to know specifically?" "Well, the other day I reviewed my statements and found some transactions I don't remember authorizing. A loan, for example." The color drained from Beatrice's face. Adrian cleared his throat. "Ah, yes, that loan," he said, trying to sound casual. "Don't you remember? You asked me to help you with the papers, because you said the fine print confused you." "I asked you for help," I said with genuine curiosity. "Why did I need $55,000? For For future medical expenses, Beatrice improvised. You said you wanted to have money available for any health emergency. Their lies became more elaborate and less credible with each word. How strange, I murmured. Because I have very comprehensive health insurance. I wouldn't need that much money in cash. An uncomfortable silence. Finally, Adrian decided to change his strategy. Dad, this is exactly what we were talking about. You have memory gaps, contradictions in your recollections. It's not your fault. It's part of the natural aging process. But you need professional help. You're right, I told them, getting up to go to my desk. In fact, I think we should organize all my papers so you can help me better. I opened the main drawer and took out the folder that contained copies of all the evidence I had collected. Their faces went rigid when they recognized some of the documents. Look how interesting, I said, showing them the photographs they had taken without my knowledge. Do you remember when you took these photos? Beatrice stood up abruptly. Mike, I don't know where you got those photos, but I think we should go. Oh, but we just started the conversation, I responded with a smile that did not reach my eyes. Look, I also found this. I took out the copies of their handwritten notes, including the Plan B that mentioned declaring me mentally incompetent. Adrian went completely pale. Dad, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, son, I told him, with a calmness that surprised even me. I understand perfectly what you've been planning. What you don't understand is that I am no longer the defenseless victim you thought I was. I approached the landline and dialed a number I had memorized. Jack, you can come in now. The door opened and Jack entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. Adrian Miller and Beatrice Sanchez, announced one of the officers. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The terror in my son's eyes was absolute. At that moment, he stopped being the cold manipulator from the recordings and became the scared child he had been decades ago. Dad, please, he begged as they put him in handcuffs. We can fix this. We can return the money. Adrian, I told him, looking him directly in the eyes, you yourself said it was better to act fast before he suspected something. You were right. I also decided to act fast. After Adrian and Beatrice were taken away, my house was submerged in a deathly silence. Jack stayed with me to complete the legal procedures, but I could hardly concentrate on his technical explanations. I had just witnessed the arrest of my only son, and no matter how justified my decision was, the pain was devastating. Mike, Jack told me, closing his briefcase, I know this is terrible for you, but you did the right thing. With the evidence we have, the case is airtight. During the following days, events unfolded with a speed that left me dizzy. Robert kept me informed of each judicial procedure. The police had executed search warrants on both Beatrice's apartment and the house she shared with Adrian. What they found exceeded even my most pessimistic expectations. In Beatrice's apartment, they discovered a true criminal archive. Folders organized alphabetically with detailed information about other potential victims. Men over 60, widowers, with significant assets and single children. My folder was the most voluminous, with photographs, schedules, psychological analyses, and even recordings of private conversations they had obtained through spy devices. They had turned your life into a scientific study, Robert explained, showing me copies of the evidence. They knew exactly when you went to bed, what you ate, what TV shows you watched, even when you cried for Eleanor. But the most disturbing thing was finding a contract signed between Adrian and Beatrice dated March 15th, 2024, where the division of my assets had already been laid out. Adrian would receive 60 of the assets, Beatrice 40. They had put a price on my destruction and signed a business agreement to distribute the loot. On September 25th, 4 days after the arrest, Robert summoned me to his office to inform me about the formal charges. The district attorney's office has filed charges of continuous fraud, forgery of public documents, conspiracy, fraudulent placement of capital, and violation of privacy, he explained, reading from the file. For Beatrice, with her record, they are requesting 12 years in prison. For Adrian, as a main accomplice, and for exploiting the family bond, 8 years. 8 years in prison for my son. The words resounded in my head like funeral bells. Also, Robert continued, We have managed to freeze all the accounts where they transferred the stolen money. The $55,000 will be returned to your account within 15 days. That same afternoon, while I was trying to process all this information, I received an unexpected visit. It was Carol Roberts, Eleanor's sister, accompanied by her husband, Anthony. I had not spoken to them since my wife's funeral 3 years ago. "Mike, we found out what happened," Carol told me with tears in her eyes. "We cannot believe that Adrian would do something like that. Eleanor would be devastated." They invited me to dinner at their house that night. For the first time in weeks, I was surrounded by people who loved me without expecting anything in return. Carol prepared the Texas brisket that I liked so much, and Anthony listened for hours as I let out all the accumulated anguish. "What I don't understand," I confessed to Anthony, "is how I didn't see the signs. How can a father be so blind to the evil in his own son?" "Mike," he answered with the wisdom gained in his 70 years, "a father's love makes us vulnerable. Criminals know it and exploit it. It is not your fault that you trusted your son. It is his fault that he betrayed that trust." The next day, September 26th, I received the first of many calls that would change my perspective on this whole situation. It was Esperanza Morales, a 68-year-old woman from New Orleans. "Mr. Miller, I saw your case in the news," she told me with a trembling voice. "My son Fernando and a woman named Beatrice stole $105,000 from me last year. I thought I was the only one." During the following week, I received 14 similar calls, victims from all over the South who had suffered identical schemes. Fathers betrayed by their own children, manipulated by professionals of deception, robbed not only of their money, but of their dignity and trust in family. Robert organized a meeting with all these victims to coordinate a joint legal action. On October 2nd, we met in his office 12 people, mostly men over 65, all with similar stories of family betrayal. "This is much bigger than we thought," Robert explained. "We are facing an organized criminal network that has operated systematically for at least 5 years. Estimated damages exceed $3 million. Listening to all these stories made me understand something fundamental. I had not been chosen by chance. I had been carefully selected as an ideal victim, studied, analyzed, and finally attacked with surgical precision. But it also made me understand something more important. I was not alone. There were others who had gone through the same hell, and together we could ensure that these criminals would never harm another family again. On October 5th, the DA's office expanded the charges to include racketeering and continuous aggravated fraud. Potential penalties increased to 15 years for Beatrice and 10 years for Adrian. That night, alone in my house, I contemplated Eleanor's photographs on the shelf. I whispered to her, "My love, our son was lost, but I will make sure that no other father goes through this." It was time to turn my pain into purpose. 3 weeks after the arrests, on October 15th, my routine had changed completely. In the mornings, I no longer read the newspaper and drank coffee calmly. Now I spent them reviewing legal documents, answering calls from other victims, and coordinating with Robert on trial preparations. But it was that day when everything changed again. It was 2:30 in the afternoon when the doorbell rang insistently. When I opened the door, I found a woman I did not know, about 50 years old, with eyes reddened by tears. "Are you Mike Miller?" she asked me with a broken voice. "Yes. How can I help you?" "I am Dolores Martinez, Beatrice's mother," she told me, and I felt as if I had been stabbed in the stomach. "I need to talk to you." I invited her to come in, more out of curiosity than courtesy. What could the mother of the woman who had tried to destroy my life want? Dolores sat on the edge of the sofa, nervous, twisting a handkerchief between her hands. "Mr. Miller, I don't know how to begin," she murmured. "I came from Phoenix as soon as I found out what my daughter had done. I wanted to apologize to you and tell you the truth about Beatrice." During the next hour, Dolores revealed a story that made me understand the diabolical complexity of the whole situation. Beatrice's real name was Maria. She had changed it legally when she turned 18. Since she was a child, She showed an extraordinary ability to manipulate people, especially older men. She told me how Beatrice had started her scams with her own maternal grandfather, convincing him that his other grandchildren wanted to steal from him until he left her his entire inheritance. Then she continued with neighbors, family acquaintances, always perfecting her technique. The first serious case was when she was 23, Dolores continued, drying her tears. She seduced the son of a millionaire widow from Scottsdale, just as she did with your Adrian. The poor man lost his house, his savings, everything. He committed suicide 3 months later. The words of Dolores froze my blood. Beatrice was not just a swindler. She was a predator who had perfected the art of destroying families. But there is something else you should know, Dolores added with a serious expression. Beatrice never worked alone. She has partners, a network of accomplices that help her identify potential victims. Your son was not seduced by chance. He was selected specifically after they investigated your family for months. She explained to me that the network worked like a company. They had investigators who identified profitable targets, psychologists who created manipulation profiles, and even corrupt lawyers who helped legalize fraudulent transfers. Adrian, Dolores continued, was initially contacted in a bar near his work in March 2023. A man who presented himself as a financial consultant offered him a very lucrative family investment opportunity. Only after several months of gradual manipulation did they introduce him to my daughter. A whole year. They had spent a whole year preparing the ground before Beatrice appeared in our lives. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Dolores looked at me with an expression of maternal pain that I recognized perfectly. Because even though Beatrice is my daughter, I cannot allow her to continue destroying families. And because I want you to understand that your son was also a victim, at least at the beginning. Her words confused me. What do you mean? For the first 6 months, Adrian really believed he was in love and that the investments were legitimate. But when he discovered the truth, instead of reporting it or protecting you, he chose to become an active accomplice. That was his real crime. She gave me a box full of documents. This includes recordings of the meetings where my daughter trained Adrian on how to manipulate you emotionally, how to use your memories of your wife against you, how to fake filial concern. I opened the box and found audio files labeled with dates. Training session, Adrian, August 15th, 2024. Final preparation, emotional strategy, September 10th, 2024. There are 23 recordings, Dolores explained. They document the entire process of converting your son from victim to accomplice. That night, after Dolores left, I sat in front of my computer and began to listen to the recordings. What I heard was more disturbing than anything I had discovered so far. On the first recording, dated June 12, 2024, I heard Adrian crying. I can't do this to my father, he said through sobs. He trusts me. He loves me unconditionally. He's the only family I have left. Beatrice's voice answered coldly. Adrian, your father is an obstacle to our future together. If you really love me, you have to choose between him and me. In the following recordings, I could follow my son's gradual transformation. Beatrice used sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques, emotional blackmail, social isolation, intermittent rewards, and something that was particularly cruel to me, the reinterpretation of my paternal love as obsessive control. Your father doesn't love you, Beatrice said on the August 3rd recording. He controls you. He keeps you emotionally dependent so that you can never truly be free. Freeing yourself from him is freeing yourself from an emotional prison. By the August 25th recording, Adrian had already fully adopted her narrative. You're right, I heard him say, with a voice I no longer recognized as my son's. The old man has always been manipulative. It's time for him to learn the consequences of his actions. I cried that night more than I had cried since Eleanor's death. Not only for Adrian's betrayal, but for understanding how he had been systematically stripped of his humanity, turned into a tool of destruction against his own father. At dawn, with swollen eyes and a broken heart, I made a decision that even surprised me. I was going to visit Adrian in prison. On October 18th, 3 days after my conversation with Dolores, I went to the state correctional facility. I had formally requested a visit with Adrian through Robert, and after 48 hours of bureaucratic procedures, it had finally been approved. During the car ride, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't know what to expect from this meeting. To confront my son, to seek answers, to try to recover some vestige of the man I thought I had raised. The prison facilities were exactly as I had imagined them. Cold, gray, surrounded by barbed wire that constantly reminded me that people inside had lost their freedom because of terrible decisions. After going through 3 security checks, they took me to a visiting room divided by thick glass panels. I sat in a plastic chair and waited. When they brought Adrian in, I barely recognized him. In just 3 weeks in prison, he had lost a significant amount of weight. His hair was disheveled, he had deep, dark circles, and he was wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look much older than his 32 years. We looked at each other through the glass for almost a minute without speaking. Finally, Adrian picked up the phone next to him, and I did the same. "Dad," he said with a hoarse voice I hardly recognized. "I didn't expect you to come." "I didn't expect to come either," I answered bluntly, "but I needed to see you with my own eyes." His eyes immediately filled with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I know there's no excuse for what I did, but you need to know it didn't start as a plan to rob you." "I know," I told him, surprising him. "I talked to Beatrice's mother. I listened to the recordings." His expression changed to total shock. "What recordings?" "The 23 recordings, where Beatrice systematically trained you to become my enemy. Where she taught you to use my love for your dead mother against me. Where she convinced you that my paternal love was manipulation." Adrian began to cry openly, leaning his forehead against the glass. "Dad, she had me completely under her control. She isolated me from all my friends. She made me emotionally dependent on her. She convinced me that you were the villain in our family story." "And when did you decide it was true?" I asked him directly. "When did you stop being a victim to become my willing executioner?" Adrian was silent for several minutes, visibly struggling with his answer. "It was after I signed the contract with her," he finally admitted. "When I saw in writing how much money we were going to get, $550,000 for me, more money than I had ever seen in my life. For the first time in 32 years, I was going to be rich, independent, free." "Free of me," I said. "Free of feeling like the failed son who could never equal his father's success." "Do you know what it's like to grow up in the shadow of Mike Miller?" he answered bitterly. "The successful businessman, the perfect husband, the man who did everything right?" His words hit me like a slap. "Adrian, I never pressured you to be like me." "You didn't have to," he shouted into the phone. "Your very existence was constant pressure. Every time someone asked why I didn't have your success, every time you introduced me as my son, Adrian, instead of just Adrian, you reminded me that I was just an extension of your legacy." The conversation took a turn I had not anticipated. We weren't just talking about the scam. We were unearthing decades of resentment I had never perceived. "So you decided to destroy me," I said. "I decided to free myself," he corrected. "Beatrice made me see that as long as you had power over me, economic or emotional, I could never be my own person. The only way to be free was to get out from under you." And the public humiliation at the wedding? Banning my entrance with that photograph? Adrian looked ashamed. "That was my idea," he whispered. "Beatrice wanted something more discreet. But I wanted you to feel what I had felt for years. The humiliation of not being good enough." His words destroyed me. But they also freed me. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just about money. It was about a father-son competition that I never knew was happening. "Adrian," I said after a long silence, "I deeply regret if my achievements made you feel inadequate. That was never my intention." "I know," he replied, wiping his tears. "Deep down, I always knew. But it was easier to blame you than to face my own insecurities." "And now what?" I asked. Adrian looked me straight in the eye for the first time in the whole conversation. "Now I accept the consequences of my decisions. I'm going to plead guilty, I'm going to return every last dollar I stole, and I'm going to serve my full sentence. It's the least I can do after what I did to you. And after prison." "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I'll try to rebuild my life from scratch." but I understand if you can never forgive me." I stared at him for a long time. This 32-year-old man who was still my son, despite everything he had done. "Adrian," I finally said, "forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoring trust immediately. But forgiveness does mean I won't allow your betrayal to destroy my ability to love." His eyes filled with tears again. "When you get out of prison," I continued, "if you've really learned from this, we can try to rebuild some kind of relationship, but it will be a completely different relationship, with clear limits and trust that is earned gradually." "Really?" he asked with a glimmer of hope. "Really," I confirmed. "But first, you have to serve your sentence and show that you have really changed." I hung up the phone and got up to leave. Adrian put his hand on the glass, and after hesitating for a moment, I put mine on the other side. "I love you, Dad," he mouthed without sound. "I love you too, son," I answered in the same way. I left that prison a different man than the one who had entered, not healed, but more complete in my understanding of how we had reached this terrible point. Now I had work to do. 2 days after my visit to the prison on October 20th, my life took a completely unexpected turn. That morning, while having breakfast alone in my kitchen, I realized something that had gone unnoticed throughout this crisis. I felt deeply alone. It was not only the absence of Adrian, it was the understanding that for years, I had built my identity around being a father and husband. And now that both roles had been destroyed or lost, I did not know who Mike Miller was as an individual. I decided to walk downtown, something I had not done without a specific purpose for years. I walked past the state capitol, through the streets where Eleanor and I used to walk on Sundays, past the places that held memories of when we were a complete family. It was during that melancholic walk that I stopped in front of St. Michael's Church, a small parish in the South Congress neighborhood that I had always seen but had never visited. Something prompted me to enter. The interior was modest but cozy. There were a dozen elderly people praying in silence, and on the side altar, a priest of about 60 was arranging fresh flowers. When he saw me, he approached me with a genuine smile. "Good morning. I am Father Andrew Martin," he said, extending his hand. "I haven't seen you around here before." "Mike Miller," I introduced myself. "I was just walking." Father Andrew had that penetrating but kind look that people who have heard 1,000 confessions have, and have learned to see beyond words. "Would you like to sit down for a moment?" he asked, pointing to one of the pews. "Sometimes the Lord guides us to places where we need to be." I sat down, and without knowing why, I began to tell him about everything that had happened. Eleanor, Adrian, the betrayal, the loneliness, the feeling of having failed as a father. Father Andrew listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding and understanding. "Mike," he told me when I finished my story, "what you tell me is not the story of a man who failed. It is the story of a man who had the courage to defend his dignity when his whole world was falling apart." His words surprised me. "But I lost my son." "Your son lost himself," he kindly corrected. "You simply refused to lose yourself with him." He invited me to stay for the noon mass. During the ceremony, I met other people who, like me, had arrived at that church seeking refuge from different personal storms. Mary Jo Williams, a 61-year-old woman who had lost her husband the year before, sat next to me. "I saw your case on the news," she whispered to me during one of the hymns. "How terrible what your son did to you." After the Mass, Mary Jo invited me to have coffee with a group of parishioners who met weekly at the parish house. "We're like a chosen family," she explained as we walked. "People who, for different reasons, have had to rebuild our lives after 60. The group was made up of 8 people: widows, divorcees, parents whose adult children lived in other cities, people who, for various reasons, had to redefine what family meant in their later years. During the following weeks, I began to attend these meetings regularly. For the first time in months, I had a place where I could speak freely about my pain without feeling that it was a burden to others. Anthony Fisher, a 73-year-old man whose son had died in a car accident, helped me understand something fundamental. "Mike," he told me one afternoon while we were walking through the church courtyard, "the pain of losing a son, either by death or by betrayal, never completely disappears, but it can be turned into wisdom that helps others. It was Anthony who suggested the idea that would change the course of my remaining years. Have you thought of creating a support group for parents who have been victims of family fraud? He asked me. With your experience and the contacts you have made through the legal case, you could help many people who are going through the same thing. The idea immediately resonated in my mind. During the following weeks, I worked with Father Andrew and Robert to formally establish the St. Michael's Support Group for Victims of Family Fraud. On November 15th, we organized our first meeting. I expected maybe 5 or 6 people. 23 arrived, men and women from all over the South who had been deceived, robbed, or betrayed by their own relatives. Each story was different in detail, but they all shared common elements: emotional manipulation, abuse of trust, social isolation, and the devastating loss of faith and family. During that first meeting, I heard Raymond Johnson, 68, tell how his daughter and son-in-law had secretly sold his house while he was hospitalized. I heard Carol Vega, 72, explain how her grandson had used her identity to apply for multiple credit cards. I heard Frank Roberts, 70, describe how his son had emptied his retirement account to gamble at online casinos. "The worst thing is not the money," said Carol in tears. "The worst thing is that I no longer know who to trust. If my own family betrayed me, how can I trust anyone else?" Her words perfectly summarized the psychological trauma that we all shared. At the end of that first meeting, something extraordinary happened. Without anyone planning it, the 23 attendees stood up and formed a circle, taking each other by the hands. "Maybe we lost our blood families," said Raymond with a firm voice, "but we have found a family of choice." That night, after saying goodbye to the last member of the group, I was left alone in the parish house with Father Andrew. "How do you feel?" he asked me. "For the first time in months," I answered honestly, "I feel that my pain has a purpose." During the following weeks, the group grew exponentially. The media began to cover our activities, which attracted the attention of victims from all over the country. But more important than the numerical growth was the personal growth I experienced. Helping others process their pain helped me process my own. Turning my traumatic experience into a resource for others gave meaning to all the suffering. On November 30th, exactly 1 month after the first meeting, I received a letter from Adrian from prison. "Dad," he wrote, "I heard about the group you created on the news. I'm proud of you. You've turned our family tragedy into something that helps others. That's what I always admired about you. Your ability to find something good, even in the worst situations." Reading those words, I understood that my healing process was truly beginning. 6 months later, in March 2025, I'm sitting at my desk writing these lines while I look out the window at the garden I have started to care for again. The flowers that Eleanor planted years ago have bloomed again under my renewed attention, as if the house itself has healed along with me. The St. Michael's Support Group now has 127 active members, distributed across 12 cities in the South. We meet every Sunday after Mass and have established a 24-hour crisis hotline for people who discover family betrayals. What began as a way to process my own pain has become a life mission that gives meaning to each day. This morning, I received a call that filled me with a deep satisfaction. It was Isabella Moore, a 69-year-old woman from Atlanta, who contacted our group 3 months ago when she discovered that her son had been stealing her pension for 2 years. "Mike," she told me with a voice that radiated peace, "I wanted to thank you. After months of working with the group, I have finally managed to forgive my son without allowing him to hurt me again. I have found that delicate line between a mother's love and self-protection." Those words perfectly summarized what we were all learning. That loving does not mean being a victim, and that protecting yourself does not mean ceasing to love. The legal process against Adrian and Beatrice concluded last month. Beatrice was sentenced to 14 years in prison and ordered to pay $4 million in restitution to all her victims. The criminal network she had directed was completely dismantled, with 12 additional accomplices receiving sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years. Adrian received 9 years in prison, but due to his full cooperation with the justice system and his testimony against the other members of the network, he could be released on parole in 6 years. During these months, I have maintained regular correspondence with him. His letters have evolved from initial self-pity to a genuine understanding of the damage he caused. He has begun psychological therapy in prison and is studying for a technical degree in accounting. "Dad," he wrote in his last letter, "I have understood that my resentment towards you was actually resentment towards myself. You never asked me to be like you. I put that pressure on myself, and when I couldn't live up to it, it was easier to blame you than to face my own mediocrity." Those lines moved me deeply, not because they meant an immediate reconciliation, but because they demonstrated authentic growth. The relationship with Adrian is being rebuilt slowly, but under completely new terms. It is no longer the traditional father-son relationship based on blind trust and unconditional love. It is a relationship between two adults who are learning to know each other genuinely, with clear limits and realistic expectations. I have established specific conditions for any future reunion. Adrian must complete his sentence in full, maintain stable employment for at least 2 years after his release, and continue psychological therapy for a minimum of 5 years. Only then will I consider allowing him to gradually return to my life. It sounds harsh, but Father Andrew has helped me understand that true love sometimes requires tough love. My personal life has also experienced surprising transformations. Mary Jo and I have developed a deep friendship that has slowly evolved into something more romantic. It is not the passionate love of youth, but something more serene and conscious. Two mature people who have suffered significant losses and have learned to value authentic companionship. "We're not trying to replace our old loves," Mary Jo told me during a dinner 2 weeks ago. "We're creating something completely new, based on who we are now, not on who we were." She's right. Eleanor will always have a sacred place in my heart, but I have learned that the human heart has the capacity for multiple forms of love when it is healthy. My daily routine now includes activities that nourish my soul. Morning reading of spiritual texts, walks through the historic center of Austin, volunteer work 3 afternoons a week at a day center for the elderly, and Sundays dedicated completely to the support group. I have discovered that my experience with family fraud has made me a kind of specialist on the subject. Robert has invited me to collaborate in the drafting of new legislation to better protect older adults from this type of crime. I have also given lectures at universities on the psychology of family manipulation. The most gratifying thing has been receiving letters from people all over the country who have read about our group in the media and have found hope in our story. "Mr. Miller," wrote a man from Chicago, "your example has taught me that being betrayed by family does not mean the end of the ability to trust. It means the beginning of a deeper wisdom about who to trust and under what conditions." This afternoon, as I prepare the material for the Sunday meeting, I reflect on the extraordinary changes that have occurred in my life since that terrible morning of September 14th, when I found my photograph forbidding me from entering my son's wedding. That public humiliation, which at the time seemed like the complete destruction of my world, has become the catalyst for a personal transformation I never would have imagined possible at 65. I have learned that family betrayal, although devastating, can also be liberating. It freed me from toxic relationships based on obligation instead of mutual respect. It freed me from the need for external validation for my self-esteem. It freed me to discover aspects of my personality that had remained dormant for decades. Above all, it has taught me that true family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and genuine affection. As I write these final words, I can say with absolute certainty that, despite the immense pain I've experienced, I am a more complete, wiser, and paradoxically, happier man than before this crisis. Adrian's betrayal destroyed me, but it also rebuilt me as someone stronger, and that, in the end, has been worth every tear shed. If you like this story, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box to the left. Thanks for watching.